Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Boston, one autumn evening. The icy wind swept through the avenues, making the dead leaves dance between the hurried feet of passers-by. Michael Carter walked quickly, his collar turned up, his pockets empty, and his head full of debt. He used to wear expensive watches, drive a BMW, and talk about investing on Wall Street. Today, he was wearing an oversized, second-hand suit and living in a studio apartment where the heating no longer worked. The reversal of fortune had been brutal. A miscalculation, a lost customer, a collapsing market, and everything he had built crumbled. Her ambition had not disappeared, but it had changed color, it had become desperate. That evening, he met up with his old friend Robert Jenkins, a lawyer, in a discreet bar near the port. Robert observed him for a long time before speaking. "You look terrible, Mike. You look like you've aged 10 years in 6 months." Michael sighed, his fingers clenched around his empty glass. "If I don't find $100,000 within 2 weeks, I'll lose everything." Robert remained silent for a moment, then, in a lower voice, said, "There might be a solution. A rather unusual one." Michael raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." The lawyer took out a brown leather shirt and placed it on the table. Inside, a folder marked, "Whitaker, Margaret, Guardianship Contract and Anticipated Succession." "She is an elderly, very wealthy woman with no heirs. She is looking for someone reliable to, legally accompany her." Michael frowned. "You mean, a wedding?" Robert nodded gently. "A symbolic civil marriage. She wants to leave her assets to someone she trusts. She has lived alone since her husband's death. In exchange for your name, you will receive half of her estate upon her death." Michael laughed nervously. "Is this a joke? You want me to marry an old woman for her money?" "Not just for that," Robert replied calmly. "She wants company. Someone honest, who won't treat her like a burden. She chose you on a recommendation." "Recommendation? From whom?" "From the notary. You have a reputation as an intelligent man, and a desperate one." Silence fell. Michael hesitated. He thought about his debts, his shattered dreams, his sick mother whom he could no longer help. He was ashamed. But shame didn't pay the bills. Then, in a low, almost guilty voice, he asked, "How old is she?" 81 years old. "And she is, in good health?" "Let's just say she's still standing." A cynical smile crossed Michael's face. He suddenly felt like a player who had just found the winning card. The next day, he presented himself at Whitaker Manor, a large Victorian red brick house perched on a hill overlooking the sea. The velvet curtains, the antique portraits, the chandeliers, everything exuded the nobility of another century. The door opened slowly. An elderly woman appeared, upright despite her frailty. Her gray-blue eyes, full of lucidity, stared at him as if she could read through him. "Are you Michael Carter?" she asked in a soft voice. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded. "Come in." The floorboards creaked under their feet. Margaret Whitaker invited him to sit in the living room, near a crackling fire. She poured some tea, took a sip, then said, "Mr. Carter, I know what people are thinking. That a rich old woman marrying a young man is ridiculous. But I'm not looking for love. I'm looking for someone who won't abandon me before the end." Michael remained silent. She continued, "You will receive everything I own upon my death. My houses, my accounts, my lands. In exchange, you offer me your presence, your time, your respect. And, a name." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "Do you think you could pretend to love an old woman for a few years?" Michael felt his throat tighten. He knew that this statement was a provocation. Yet he replied without hesitation, "Yes, ma'am. I can." Margaret watched him for a long time, then slowly nodded her head. "Very well. We'll go sign at my notary's office tomorrow. When he left the manor that evening, the wind had calmed down. He gazed at the city lights in the distance, his heart pounding. He had just sold a part of his soul, and he knew it. But what he didn't know was that this woman would give him back everything he had lost: dignity, kindness, and a lesson that no amount of money could ever buy. The following morning, a gray sky covered Boston with a cold mist. Michael Carter looked at himself one last time in the cracked mirror of his studio. His black suit, although ironed, was beginning to show signs of wear. He took a deep breath. Today, he was signing the contract that would change his life. The taxi dropped him off in front of the Whittaker mansion, perched on Beacon Hill. The house seemed to come from another time: dark brick walls, carved wooden shutters, a garden overgrown with wild roses. Every detail breathed of past wealth, but also of loneliness. An elderly maid opened the door. "Mrs. Whittaker is waiting for you, Mr. Carter." Michael entered, his gaze drawn to the golden light that fell through the stained glass windows. The floorboards creaked under her feet, as if the house itself was judging her every move. In the main living room, Margaret Whittaker was waiting for him, dressed in a pearl gray suit. His wrinkled face bore a peaceful, almost ironic expression. "Hello, Michael," she said calmly. "You've come." "I promised," he replied. "That's rare these days. Keep your promise to the end, and everything will be fine." The notary, Mr. Reynolds, entered in turn, placed a pile of papers on the coffee table, and began reading the contract. The clauses were simple. Margaret allowed him to use the house, a personal account for his expenses, and upon her death, her entire inheritance. In exchange, he was to live with her, accompany her to her appointments, and ensure her safety. Everything seemed too perfect to be true. When the time came to sign, Michael felt a shiver run through him. Margaret calmly dipped her quill in the ink. "You know, Mr. Carter, money always has two faces. One attracts, the other destroys." Michael forced a smile. "I suppose it all depends on what you do with it." "Yes," she replied, her gaze piercing. "And what one is willing to lose to have it." They signed. A few minutes later, they were officially husband and wife, a marriage without love, without a kiss, without a promise of a future. Just a pact between impatient youth and lucid old age. The following days were strange. Michael settled into a wing of the house. Margaret gave him a key, a timetable, and a few simple rules. No guests, no alcohol in the living room, and no lies. The truth always comes out in the end, like wood in water. He spent his first few days exploring the house. Each room seemed to tell a story. A clock that has stopped for years. Old portraits of men in uniform. Stacks of letters neatly arranged in iron boxes. In the library, he discovered a multitude of books: philosophy, poetry, war diaries. On a shelf, a photo caught her eye: Margaret, young, surrounded by children. Behind it, an inscription: "My students, my treasures." He frowned. These children looked poor and poorly dressed. So she had been a schoolteacher? He had no idea. That evening, at the dinner table, he dared to ask the question. "Were you a teacher?" Margaret looked up from her plate, surprised by his interest. "Yes. For 40 years. In neighborhoods where nobody wanted to teach." She paused, then added, "I learned that hungry children don't retain lessons. So, I fed them before teaching them to read." Michael remained silent. He wasn't expecting that answer. He tried to change the subject, but Margaret continued. "Tell me, Michael, what do you like to do?" He hesitated. "Win. Succeed." She nodded her head, without judgment. "Interesting. And if you can no longer win? Who are you then?" The question remained unanswered. He didn't know what to say. As the days went by, Michael observed Margaret with curiosity. She lived simply, getting up at 6 o'clock, reading the newspaper, a walk in the garden, tea at 4 o'clock. No ostentation, no unnecessary luxury. She gave checks to local charities every week. When he asked her why, she replied with a quiet smile. Because I don't need that much. And because others have nothing. Michael, meanwhile, spent his evenings recalculating his plans. He was already imagining the investments he would make once he received the inheritance, a house in Miami, a sports car, a new beginning. But every time he saw Margaret cross the veranda with her cane, his heart sank slightly, without him knowing why. One evening, while they were having dinner, the conversation turned to death. "Aren't you afraid?" he asked, almost involuntarily. "What?" "To die alone." Margaret smiled gently. "You never truly die alone, Michael. You die surrounded by what you've done. Some die surrounded by regrets, others by memories. It's a matter of choice." Those words struck him to the core. This woman, whom he believed to be naive, seemed to read through him, understanding his hidden motivations without ever condemning them. And the more time passed, the more he found himself wanting to understand her. One morning, he found her in the garden, watering the flowers in the sunshine. She turned towards him, a serene smile on her lips. "You know, Michael, we often think that young people have all the time in the world. But sometimes, it's the older generation who know how to use it best." He did not reply. But for the first time in a long time, he stopped thinking about money. That evening, lying in his room, Michael stared at the ceiling. He had signed this contract to get rich. But the Whittaker house seemed to gradually erase its cynicism, stone by stone, like a sea polishing rocks. And without yet knowing it, he had just taken the first step in his transformation. The house was no longer just a makeshift waiting place. It was a mirror. And this mirror, slowly, showed him a face he no longer recognized. The Westmore Manor stood atop a hill, as majestic as it was intimidating. Arriving there for the first time, Ethan felt a mixture of fascination and dread. Everything about it exuded the old world. The ancestral portraits hanging on the walls seemed to follow him with their eyes, the mahogany furniture gave off a scent of wax and dust, and every step on the parquet floor made the silence groan. Mrs. Eleanor Westmore, now Eleanor Carter, was waiting for him in the grand salon. She wore a midnight blue dress and a pearl necklace of rare elegance. Her piercing green eyes betrayed a keen intelligence. "Ethan, come closer. You seem uncomfortable. Do you already regret our marriage?" she asked in a soft but firm voice. "No, madam. I mean, no, Eleanor. I'm just impressed by all of this." "Impressed or scared?" "Perhaps a little of both." A slight smile appeared on her lips. She stood up slowly, leaning on her silver cane. "You know, Ethan, people think marriage is a contract of feelings. In our case, it's a contract of truths. If you respect me, you'll be surprised by what you find here." That phrase remained etched in his mind. That evening, they dined alone, served by a silent housekeeper. Eleanor spoke little of herself, but much of life, power, and above all, the value of loyalty. Ethan, on the other hand, feigned listening. In his mind, only one goal resonated: to await the signing of the will and the inheritance. But in the following days, something changed. Every morning, he saw her in the garden, feeding the birds with infinite gentleness. One evening, he surprised her at the piano, playing a melancholic melody that brought back a childhood memory, that of his grandmother singing to him when he had lost his parents. This woman, whom he had initially perceived as a cold and calculating old lady, seemed to carry an immense weight, an invisible burden. And the more he observed her, the more he felt a kind of respect growing within him, mingled with a painful curiosity. One evening, while walking through the library, he found a portrait of a young man in uniform. On the back, an inscription. "Forever, your son, Henry." He asked the housekeeper, Martha, "Who is this man?" She lowered her eyes. "The lady's son. Died in 1999, in a plane crash. She never got over it." Ethan felt a shiver run through him. He then understood why Eleanor always had that lost look towards the sky, why her laughter sometimes sounded false. This woman was not only rich, she was lonely. The following evening, at dinner, he dared to ask her the question. "Eleanor, your son, that was Henry, wasn't it?" A long silence followed. She put down her fork. "Yes. Henry was my everything. And you remind me a little of him, Ethan. Not because of your ambition, but because of what you hide behind your eyes." He wanted to protest, but she added. "Don't deny it. You came here for something. Maybe for the money. Maybe to escape something. But you'll see, this mansion has its own lessons." And for the first time, Ethan felt a strange fear. Not the fear of being discovered, but the fear of having to confront who he really was. Weeks passed, and the once silent manor now seemed to whisper secrets to Ethan that he never wanted to hear. Every room had its story, every corner seemed to be watching him. Eleanor, for her part, remained mysterious, sometimes affectionate, sometimes distant. She offered him small gifts, gestures of kindness, but always accompanied by enigmatic phrases. "What you're looking for here can't be bought. Some legacies are only passed on to those who are worthy." Ethan was trying to understand. He knew that the family lawyer, Grace Holloway, was due to arrive soon to finalize paperwork concerning the Westmore estate. He was waiting for that day like a deliverance. But one morning, he overheard a conversation between Eleanor and Grace in the office, the door ajar. "The will remains confidential, Grace. He's not ready to know yet." "Are you sure, Eleanor? You could cause a scandal if he finds out through any other means. Let him learn from life. This boy doesn't need money, he needs a reason." Ethan stepped back, his heart pounding. Not ready to know? Need a reason? What was she hiding? That night, he slipped quietly into the office. He now knew the housekeeper's footsteps, the hours when Eleanor slept. He searched the drawers, then found a silver key engraved with a strange symbol, a black lily. He remembered seeing that symbol on a door in the third-floor hallway, which was always locked. Driven by curiosity, he climbed the stairs in silence, each step creaking under his feet. He inserted the key. The lock gave way. Inside, the room was a sanctuary frozen in time. Photos of the missing son, Henry, covered the walls. On the desk, a leather notebook bore the initials H.W. Ethan opened the first pages. He read. "My mother always told me that to love is to give without expecting anything in return. But sometimes I wonder if she expects too much from me. If someone else ever enters her life, I hope they will see her not as an old woman, but as the guardian of a broken heart." The words pierced his soul. This son had written this before his death. And he spoke of himself, as if fate had willed that he should read these lines. He continued turning the pages until he came across a sealed envelope, addressed to the one who comes after me. With trembling hands, he opened it. "If you're reading this, it means my mother has decided to give you a chance. But be careful, not everything she's offering you is real. This mansion is a test. She wants to know if you're worth more than you claim to be. If you came for the money, you'll lose everything. If you came to understand, then you'll find more than you expect." Ethan remained frozen. Everything made sense. Eleanor wasn't looking for a husband, she was looking for a moral heir. A man capable of bearing the weight of her fortune without being corrupted. The next day, at breakfast, he calmly placed the letter on the table in front of her. She looked at her, then raised her eyes to him. "So, you found the room. Why did you lie to me? Why this test?" "Because, my boy, I've seen too many men consumed by greed. I wanted to know if you were different. And now, I'm beginning to believe that you might be." Ethan felt his throat tighten. For the first time, he no longer knew whether he wanted his money or his forgiveness. Winter settled on Westmore Hill, draping the manor in a veil of silence and frost. The days grew shorter, and the light filtering through the stained glass windows seemed colder, more melancholy. Ethan had changed. The man who had come here with a thirst for wealth was beginning to understand what life had truly offered him, a a chance to become human again. But time, for its part, left him no choice. One morning, the housekeeper Martha woke him up in a panic. "Mr. Ethan. Mrs. Eleanor is not feeling well." He rushed into Eleanor's room. She was pale, panting, lying in her large four-poster bed. Her fingers were trembling, but her gaze remained calm. "Don't worry, Ethan. It's just an old clock that's slowly stopping." He took her hand. "I'm going to call a doctor." "It's pointless. I've already prepared everything. Dr. Mason knows my time is coming." Ethan felt a burning sensation in his chest. "You can't leave me now. Not after everything you've taught me." She smiled faintly. "You speak like a man who has understood what he was looking for." In the days that followed, he stayed by her bedside, completely forgetting about the papers, the will, the fortune. He read her favorite books, accompanied her to the garden when she could still walk, and prepared tea for her as she liked it. The manor, once so cold, suddenly seemed full of warmth. In her final moments, Eleanor often spoke to him about her son. "Henry was your age when he died. He wanted to be a pilot, to travel, to help others. He had that same fire I found in you. That's why I chose you, Ethan. You reminded me of the best part of him." One night, as the snow fell outside, she took his hand and whispered, "Promise me you'll never let wealth define you. Promise me you'll give what you've never received." "I promise you." "So you're ready to inherit." Those were his last words. The following morning, she had passed away peacefully. A few days later, Miss Grace Holloway returned to the mansion with a black briefcase. She asked Ethan to sit down in the large living room. "Eleanor had left me very specific instructions. Here is the letter she wrote to you before her death." Ethan opened the envelope. Inside, a simple sheet of paper. "My dear Ethan. You came into my life for the money, and you left with a heart. That's the real legacy. But because you kept your promise, I leave you everything I own, the manor, the land, and the Westmore Foundation. Make something good of it. Make it a home for those the world forgets, as you once were. And if one day you doubt, remember, wealth is not measured in dollars, but in souls saved. With affection, Eleanor Westmore Carter." Tears flowed uncontrollably. It was no longer a question of fortune. It was a call for redemption. Months passed. Ethan transformed the mansion into a shelter for disadvantaged youth. Eleanor's portrait hung in the hall, like a benevolent presence. Every time he caught a lost look, he remembered her, her words, her lesson. And sometimes, in the evening, he would look out the window, towards the sky where the snow was falling gently, and murmur, "Thank you, Eleanor. You gave me everything, even myself."